Good day, everyone. My name is Matthew, and I would like to welcome you to this podcast. And this is the first part of a many parts podcast on competition versus cooperation. So, essentially, the first part is called the current state and its justification. Because in this part, I just want to outline the sort of system we live in. And I think that we all know it to a certain extent, but again, I want to just do a little deep dive with you and rethink the system we're living in. So right now, what we live in a system called capitalism, and capitalism, as opposed to I guess communisms or socialisms, is really a competition-based system. And so, well, why is it a competition-based system? Because since day one in your life, you're in competition. And I don't mean by that when you're born, but when you go to school, well, you need to have good grades, because the better your grades, the better chances you have to get into a better high school or better college or university, and therefore increasing your chances to have a better job and then better salary and so on, and the better quality of life. At the end of the day, it all comes down to quality of life. So the whole system is based on competition. And so right now, a lot of people are questioning that, because we can see that more and more people are suffering. There's been massive loss of jobs in the past few years, but there are still some arguments out there that are justifying why capitalism is still the best system. So many times you've probably heard that in your life. Well, the system's not perfect, but this is the best we've got. And when people say that, they usually have in mind the comparison between capitalism, communism, and maybe socialism, or anarchy and maybe chaos. I don't know, but usually that's what they have in mind. So they say, you know what, it's the best of two evils, so let's take it. And well, it's pretty much the same in elections, right? Political elections, exactly the same. So I'm going to give you a few arguments. The first one that you hear a lot when it comes to capitalism is that competition fosters innovation. First of all, as if innovation is a guarantee of better living standards, which is totally wrong. But and I will make a podcast on that. But yes, we do hear that a lot, that competition fosters innovation. And on this whole idea, I would say that is not entirely false, because it's true that competition can do that. But the context of the whole idea, I think that most of this argument is false, and we will cover that in the upcoming podcast. A second argument that we hear, and that really upsets me, is that if we were to redistribute all the wealth in the world equally, in a few years from now, the rich that are currently rich would still get rich and even richer, and the wealth will go back to the people it originally came from. And I think that argument is actually true, but I don't know if you notice, but people never really actually tell you why, because they've heard that somewhere, so they just repeat it. But why is it the case? It's not that the argument's false. It's that obviously there's something wrong with the system if wealth would come back to the same people. Now, if you want my opinion on that, I would tend to believe that this is an argument that people love to use, because it just makes it more palatable for themselves to live in that system, knowing that so many people are suffering. So, it just blames the people who would not have the wealth in the end, as opposed to blaming the system that is highly unfair. A third argument that we that we hear, and we have definitely heard that a lot on YouTube in the past years from Ron Paul, Peter Schiffs, and many prominent people on television. We hear that, well, you know what? It's because right now we do not live in a free market. We live under what they call corporatism, or fascism, because it's sort of the merger of state and corporations, but it's not a free market. So that's another argument that is used to justify capitalism. But again, I think that the argument is true. But if we were to live in a free market, do you really think that there would be better living arrangements for most people on the planet? Think about that. And we'll come back to this on the upcoming podcast. Another argument is that I think this one is actually not an argument. It's more an observation that I've made, is that I feel like a lot of people, because they fail to come up with an alternative of a system or a way of living, then they automatically go back to capitalism, because they know that big bad China and countries where they still have or had before communism as a system, it all failed. So for them, the good USA is the solution. So I think that is a problem. The failure to imagine or consider an alternative brings them back to capitalism. One last argument that I would say is actually used to justify capitalism is that by being forced to work, and working is a way of contributing to the system or society. So by being forced to work, then it gives you an incentive to participate to the system. So they're assuming that if you weren't forced to work, people wouldn't work. Well, obviously, in a system that is not really, which is highly unfair, and a system that is controlled by bankers, and a system that is based on competition, yeah, of course. I mean, who would work if you weren't forced to work? If you could just live, and I don't mean in luxury or anything, but if you could live really comfortably without having to be a slave to the system, why in the world would you work? It doesn't make any sense. And that doesn't mean you wouldn't work on yourself, you wouldn't work out, you would not help your neighbors, you wouldn't. That doesn't mean that you would stay on your couch doing nothing. But the concept of being forced to work as an incentive is definitely an argument that say, well, you know what? At least in that system, people are forced to contribute, so everybody would help the system to be maintained by essentially slavery, if you really think about it. We'll also come back to this point on in another podcast, but this is a very important point. And I just want to say that, all the tax systems, the wealth redistribution, the charity, the food stamps, all the government programs that we have to give to the poor people. I think this is a really poor attempt to cooperate on this planet. It's like, and this is just a theory that I'm saying, but it's like people know on a subconscious level that this system does not work, that this system has so many flaws. But because you're in the system of competition, and let's say in your case, you're doing well, and you know that you could be in a worse state, then in that case, you feel good about yourself if you give to other people, because it's like you're doing your part. While knowing that the whole thing does not work. The whole thing is highly unfair. But the concept of fairness, the concept of cooperation, is so foreign to us right now. It's like an impossibility for so many people in their minds even to consider the fact that maybe cooperation could be at the center of a new way of living. So it's mind-blowing, frankly, but I think more and more people do realize, or at least are getting to that point. And it's going to be really interesting to in the other parts to make a deep dive on these arguments, because I feel like if people take the time to really think about it, like I said in the introduction video, it might change their consciousness. It may alter their way of seeing things. And things don't change overnight, but if you allow logic and if you allow your consciousness and your wisdom to guide you regarding these issues, I would tend to say that there's only one conclusion, that it is possible. And again, not that I have the answer, but it's like pretty much what I'm trying to say is, look, I don't have the answer exactly, but I know, the core concept of it. In other words, I know that cooperation should be at the center of a new paradigm of living, but I don't know exactly how we're going to do it. And that answer is so not satisfying for so many people that instead of trying to think about something else, they're just going to go right back to capitalism. But you know what? More and more people are suffering right now. More and more people are losing their jobs to robots, to failing businesses, to big mergers. And I think that when it comes to a certain amount of people, there will be either a revolution, there will be a protest, or things will happen, and they will try to fight the government. But at the end of the day, if that's what you're trying to do, you will fail, because what you need is a different consciousness, and what you need is, I would tend to say, and also the need right now is not to try to fix the old, but to create the new. I'm going to say that again. Right now, our goal is not to fix the old, but to create the new. And I will finish this podcast by leaving you with a quote from Einstein. And you probably heard that before, when he said, "You cannot solve a problem with the same level of consciousness that was used to create it." On that, I thank you very much, and I'll be talking to you soon.